All right, here we are on Wednesday, August the 5th. Time for the daily briefing on KLAM and KCDV, 1 p.m., 5 p.m., and 8 p.m. hours for these updates on the radio. They get uploaded to youtube.com/Cordova TV. As soon as we can get them up there afterwards, we're visiting with Mayor Koplin today. As our case count creeps up again a little, we're at the time of this update sitting at 5 active resident cases and 1 active non-resident case. And we'll talk about that with the mayor a little bit, talk about the importance of privacy through this and some changes, another change to the coming changes. So this is change to the change for the out-of-state travel mandate, people coming into Alaska from out of state. And actually, stay tuned after the visit with Clay, because I'll go over that in a little bit more detail as we wrap this update up. But for right now, let's play the conversation with the mayor here on the Clam and the Eagle. Mayor Koplin, good to visit with you again. As our numbers, they kind of waver between staying stable and coming up a little bit. And you actually participated in a meeting today with our emergency folks, the IMT, the emergency operations people. What are some takeaways from that meeting that you're able to share with us?
Well, I think, again, we're very sensitive to public feedback and requests for information and so forth. And I think we continue to try to refine our messaging and the timeliness and relevance of it. And there's kind of a bit of a catch-22, and we've talked about this a little bit before, where we want to get information out quickly, but we also want to provide that information accurately. And so as I'll say, compete with public media to get the word on the street, we kind of have an internal litmus of what kind of risk does this pose to the community. And if the information on testing, say we have a couple of positive tests, if we release that information at 6 in the evening and no other information, that can actually create a lot of anxiety, right? People want to know more details. And then the next morning, if those details follow along and they say, well, they're residents or non-residents, it's fishing industry related and so forth, then that's a little more information. So I think we're continuing to work to strike a balance there. And I think the commitment of the team is that anything that poses a community risk is going to be communicated very quickly. If something doesn't pose an immediate risk or increase the immediate risk to the community, that's going to be more on a next morning type time scale, where we can also update our dashboard, have our radio messaging conversations like this, and our public service announcements, all kind of sharing the same information that, again, has been vetted. It's accurate. So that's kind of one of the main takeaways.
Are you is the team, either through the email address or the info line or any of the assets, is there still kind of I hate to say paranoid, because that's kind of strong, but I don't know, just this human nature, I guess it's really a human nature reaction, this desire to know who it is and where it was and all that kind of stuff? Is the team still having to field a lot of that kind of inquiry?
Actually, yes. There's a lot of sensitivity. A lot of people are listening to the public service announcement, to this program, and that's good. It means that it's the source of information that we had hoped to provide to the community. But something as simple as changing the terminology from seafood processor to seafood industry is generating calls. And people are concerned that, well, what does that mean? Is it a processor? Is it a boat? Is it who is it? And talking to Dr. Sanders this morning and at the incident management team meeting this morning, we do have to be sensitive to HIPAA. And in a small ecosystem like this, where, for example, it doesn't take a lot of footwork to figure out that if it's boat related and you walk by the harbor and you see there's only one same boat in town, or that it's processor related and it's a resident case, that really, really narrows it down to the individuals, that yes, you can start singling people out, and that is not the intention. And it really begs the bigger question of how much do we need to know? We need to know information that poses a risk to us. And we need to know that there are almost certainly unidentified cases of COVID within the community. And that means that we need to be following those protocols and protecting our own personal health and taking steps to make sure that we don't catch or spread the virus. And that's really what we need to know. We shouldn't act any differently if we know who tested positive or not. It's just important to know that we are having cases crop up. We do likely have cases out there. So, yeah, that's a continuing conversation around information and the way it's packaged and when it's received.
I can't remember if it was you and I or Dr. Sanders and I that talked about, sort of the irony. While there is an impulse, if there's a threat to your health, whether it's somebody carrying a disease or whatever, to give that known vector a wide berth. But the irony in this situation is, say you're at the grocery store and, you see somebody that was outed as being a positive case. And so you give them a wide berth. Instead of 6 feet, you give them 12 feet. And in that process, you move within 3 feet of somebody you don't even know. And that person you don't even know could be an asymptomatic carrier, and you'd basically walk right into the virus while thinking you were doing this safe gesture of staying away from the known source. I mean, that's kind of, it sounds like the message that you're trying to get out, right? That knowing who and when really has a lot less to do with your safety than this other strategy we've talked about, really, if you want to be safe, just assume anybody out there that's not within your bubble could have it.
That's exactly right. And I think it's why we struggle with this. The human mind is really organized structured to organize things into baskets. And unfortunately, if you say, well, we have 5 active cases, there's a tendency to think, well, those are the only active cases. Or that if we're doing widespread testing and we identify active cases, that means that there are others out there. And that's just not how we can function. And you're right, sometimes running out of the frying pan takes you closer to the fire.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. You have to really kind of process that for a sec, because in some ways it seems to go against a natural instinct. But, when you do the math, that really kind of is how it shakes out. Anything else from your meeting this morning that was particularly interesting, or any other meetings you've had with folks at the state or federal level recently?
I haven't seen real dramatic changes on the front. Of course, the state has been announcing and getting ready to implement new travel restrictions. Yeah. And again, that seems to be a somewhat fluid process.
And in fact, there was a pretty significant change to the travel. Well, not super significant, but at least a new facet to that in terms of this requirement that's supposed to go into place on the 11th of you've got to have a negative test in hand to get into the state.
That's right. There was kind of a line in the sand there, but I think there was a lot of pushback, and it's been so challenging for people to enter the state anyway that I think the state made a late-breaking decision that you could get tested once you arrived in the state, but there would be a $250 fee for that.
Right. Yeah, I always kind of wondered what they were going to do enforcement-wise. Are they going to just put you on the next plane back home? And this seems to be a sort of compromise. And I'll go over that again as we wrap that up, because I can bring the text up for it. But so any other interesting, travel, you've said the last few times, is challenging. Anything else?
I just a reminder again that we have finite testing resources, so it's good to get the advice of your medical providers. If you're concerned about close contact, remember that the city and state are going to be following through with contact tracing, and if you become aware of a new case and feel like you may have had some exposure to that, it's good to check with your medical provider. And on the testing front, I think it's important to recognize that Alaska is well ahead of the per capita average testing for the country. And so we do see active cases here that are maybe a little more out of proportion with the, than we would think. In other words, the overall spread we may see more of it here, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we rank higher, for example. And then Cordova is another example where within the state we have a fairly high per capita testing. So that's been a really important tool for us and help us identify cases, but it doesn't identify all of them. So I guess the good and bad takeaways there are that we are catching cases through our screening. It's being effective and helping us isolate and prevent community spread, but we can't assume that means that there aren't more cases out there. So.
Okay. And you've got a council meeting tonight. Anything particularly COVID-related there, or will it be more general business, do you think?
It's overall, it's more general business. We have been looking at the CARES Act upgrades and how to implement those, but this is going to be a regular monthly meeting, business meeting. I know that the schools are having conversations about reopening. I suspect probably in my mayor's report, I'll encourage council to start thinking about reopening City Hall and what that's going to look like. At least start those conversations, and should be a good meeting. Again, hopefully our communications platform is a little more public friendly, but that's part of opening meetings back up too, to make sure that we get the proper and adequate public participation in the government process, and maybe one good takeaway of this pandemic. And then, of course, our civic duty to vote. The poll is now open at City Hall, so you can vote early and on your own schedule. When I stopped in the City Hall this morning, there was nobody actually in the voting booth. So encourage citizens to take advantage of that. And since we're on the civic vein, don't forget to fill out and submit your census if you haven't done so.
That's a good point. So there is a voting booth, and I assume that gets wiped down in between people and all that. They're monitoring that so it doesn't become a vector?
Absolutely, and there's wide separation and spacing and handrails, so you check in just as you get inside City Hall. They have the closed areas of the hall barricaded. Then it's a walk clear to the other side of the atrium, so it's very, very widely distanced and then sanitized. So it's a real safe environment, and would encourage people to take advantage of it. Okay,
good. Well, anything else you want to leave us with before we wrap it up for today?
No, just want to thank you again, and also our Emergency Operations Center and amazing medical team and Dr. Sanders for the work they continue to do to keep our community safe.
All right. Well, that sounds good, and thank you for the time. We'll see what develops in the next day and when our next visit is. Okay, so as promised, again, to highlight this update to the rules for non-resident travel. The new protocol, you remember, taking effect Tuesday, August 11th, where all non-residents need to arrive with a negative COVID-19 PCR test taken within 72 hours prior to departure, or proof of a pending test result from a test taken within 72 hours prior to departure. This was to focus our testing supplies on Alaskans and not be using them on folks coming in from outside. That created a problem, of course. What do you do with somebody who doesn't show up, who arrives on a plane without that negative test? The modification that has been made is that people can still get tested once they arrive in Alaska, but non-residents can't have that for free. It's $250 if a non-resident arrives without a pre-test. They can get tested for $250, and the traveler will be required to quarantine while waiting on results. Now, for Alaska residents, it's the same. Testing remains available at no cost to Alaska residents. They can opt for the 14-day quarantine if they don't want to be tested for some reason. And Alaska residents traveling back to home communities in rural Alaska have the option of testing at the airport sites to prevent bringing the virus into the smaller communities. You can learn more about this at covid19.alaska.gov. Remember, our local site is covid19.cityofcordova.net, which is always available to you. 424-INFO, of course. And our updates in the 1 p.m., 5 p.m., and 8 p.m. hours on the radio, also uploaded to youtube.com/Cordova TV. We'll say hello to any of you that are listening online and keeping up that way. Thank you all for continuing to let us know that these have been useful to you and that you do listen to them. We'll wish you all the best for another safe day, and we'll get back to the music on the Clam and the Eagle.